In this video, you will see the Zoom ID posted at the beginning and end for our fellowship hour following the service. This begins at 12:30 and goes till 1:30, giving us a short break after worship. Feel free to eat lunch and have a drink with us. During this time, we are not taking tithes. If you have a need and feel comfortable posting your Venmo in the comment section, please do so. You can also message us privately. For those that have abundance, please share with those in need as you are able. For musicians and artists, you may see a Venmo ID or organization of their choice displayed. Please tip them as you are willing and able. At the end of our service, we will take communion together. Set aside something to munch on and a drink for this portion. If you like our service, please share our video. Sometimes during our services, we cover heavy topics. Some things may be triggering at points. If the subject matter gets too heavy, we understand and want you to take care of yourself. Step away for a moment, come back later, and skip it if you need. We are a diverse community, and the only thing we don't tolerate is intolerance. We are not a church where you will always be comforted. What you will find is you will always be challenged. We ask that everyone comes to this space open and willing to listen. We hope that this space fosters community, conversation, reflection, and action. Hi everyone. This week I'm going to read a poem by Charles Bukowski, who is a German-American poet, novelist, and short story writer. He called Los Angeles his home and writes about the ordinary lives of poor Americans. This is the consummation of grief. I even hear the mountains, the way they laugh, up and down their blue sides, and down in the water, the fish cry, and the water is their tears. I listen to the water on nights I drink away, and the sadness becomes so great, I hear it in my clock. It becomes knobs upon my dresser. It becomes paper on the floor. It becomes a shoehorn, a laundry ticket. It becomes cigarette smoke, climbing a chapel of dark vines. It matters little. Very little love is not so bad. A very little life. What counts is waiting on walls. I was born for this. I was born to hustle roses down the avenues of the dead.
I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he stood so fiercely against such iniquity. I'm singing, oh, how marvelous and how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. Oh, how marvelous and how wonderful is the love that sets the captives free. For me, it was in the garden. He said, not my will, but thine. He carried his cross up Calvary, and I'm willing to carry mine. I'm singing, oh, how marvelous and how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. Oh, how marvelous and how wonderful is the love that sets the captives free. I'm singing, oh, how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is love that sets the captives free. No justice, no peace.
America, I've got something to say. And if you don't want to hear it, well then go on about your day. But wear a mask so we can celebrate. Please wear a mask so we can congregate. Just wear the mask. Nobody's trying to take your rights away. And if you're gonna make that face, we'd rather you cover it up anyway. Wear a mask so we can get our jobs back. The world ain't spinning around you. I know that's hard to hear, but wear a mask. Oh, and I hope this message gets through. Everything is not about you. Just be kind, listen, and join me in this task. Please wear us. Just wear the freaking mask. Please wear a mask.
Hey y'all, welcome to the weekly live cast. Now, for those that do not know, my name is Christopher Van Hall. I'm the pastor of Greater Purpose Community Church and author of Reborn Again, Crucifying Christendom, and Resurrecting a Radical. If you're new here to this live cast, we're glad that you showed up in this sacred space where the lives of those on the margins truly matter and all identities are celebrated and affirmed. Y'all, I am really excited about today's service and live cast here because in this age of coronavirus, the fates saw fit to curse me with having to become a dollar store televangelist and a podcaster, aka podpastor, out of necessity. I guess I made fun of Joel Osteen too much, I suppose. But this new format is actually something that I'm really enjoying, especially on occasions like today, because it's the first guest that we've had for both our online worship service and the podcast. Y'all, today we are blessed with our regional minister of the Disciples of Christ of Northern California and Nevada, the minister, the myth, the legend, Reverend Dr. Lafaunya Bynum. Let's all give Lafaunya a warm round of applause. Lafaunya, I've got actually automated round of applause here for you, if that'll.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. We'll simulate the experience. So.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a fun little device. I'm having a little too much fun with it. I think my congregation would probably agree with that. So first off, Dr. Bynum, the burning question that inquiring minds have to know: what is your favorite cocktail when you go out to a bar or when you're hanging out with your friends?
Yeah, when I'm hanging out with my friends, I will either have a glass of white wine, a Greyhound with vodka, and grapefruit juice, but I am mainly a beer person.
Oh, nice. What's your favorite beer?
My favorite beer right now is Michelob Ultra.
Okay.
But I like to, when I'm out of town,
mm-hmm.
When I'm on a trip and just relaxing, I like to try local microbrews.
Oh, nice.
But I'm not a big IPA person. I don't like bitter beer.
Tired of beer tasting like pine trees all the time. So that could have been a nice little plug for our brewery that we were opening there too. You could have said, my favorite beer is Greater Purposes. I'm just kidding.
Well, it will be when you're open and I can travel freely. I'm happy to come and sample.
We're looking forward to that. And that should be in a couple weeks too. So very excited about that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. We're in escrow and we are at the end of escrow. So we're getting ready to cross that finish line. Dr. Bynum, there are those among us, more so probably on the podcast side of things, since this is such a new vehicle that we're using to discuss theology and cultural issues, that have never heard of our denomination, the Disciples of Christ. And I talk about it quite a bit, at church, not recently in the past few episodes. So if people are watching our podcast, they've probably never heard of that denomination before. If someone were to ask you, who are the Disciples of Christ, how would you describe our tribe?
I would describe the disciples this way. We are the first denomination born on American soil. While we have some roots in Presbyterianism, mainly in Scotland and Ireland, there was no Christian church Disciples of Christ in Europe. And so we're an American-born church and carry with us all of the positives and negatives of that. Our congregations make their own, order their own life, as I like to say. I'm a regional minister, which gives me some administrative oversight in terms of who has standing to serve as a minister. I set the tone for the region, but every congregation makes its own decisions, calls its own pastors, decides how it's going to be operating, sets its own budget, those kinds of things. So we have all of the American individualism, and we try to do a lot of things together. We have always been a church that has worked with other congregations and other churches. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of who we are. We are also very committed to Christian unity, and in an increasingly interfaith world, finding ways to work with other faiths as well.
We're kind of the OG non-denomination denomination.
Right. We're the non-denomination, the movement that became a denomination.
That's a great synopsis of who we are. And I think you phrased it very well, because I think it's difficult to describe something within a framework that's so inclusive, like the Disciples, which is what we love, at the same time. But it's, the non-denomination, denomination, interdenominational is another phrase that I hear tossed around quite a bit that I think is an appropriate label for us. And I know that I was excited to hear about the Disciples when I first began my progressive Christian journey. So hopefully, if other people have never heard of the Disciples before, that they will find out that we're the best kept secret in America.
Absolutely.
I think. I'm biased though. So
yeah. No, I do too. So.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Bynum, if you could tell us about your faith journey, and also in that story, can you describe how you discovered the Disciples of Christ?
I can combine those both pretty easily. I heard somebody say once that there are three ways that a person joins a family, and those three ways are the same ways that people find a church, that we are either born into it, we marry into it, or we are adopted by it. We adopt the church or family, the family or church adopts us. I am a lifelong disciple, which is more and more rare. Was born into this church, have been a disciple all of my life. It is as rare as that other things that I am. I'm a native Californian, and those two, you rarely find that much anymore. So people, the same way people were born in California, marry into the state, or adopted by it. My mother and her parents were disciples. And so, I'm a third generation disciple, which can be a source of pride, because I have some deep roots in this church, but it's probably meaningless for people who have not ever heard of the Disciples. Being a third generation member of something few people know about doesn't mean a whole lot, except I have kind of embedded in me kind of the history and love for this church that I love talking about. I have gone to church my entire life. I cannot remember a time when I was not in church. And my first memory of church is probably when I was 3 years old, playing in the church nursery. My journey is pretty typical of people who have been in church all or most of their lives. I went to church camp at Loch Levin in Southern California, up in the San Bernardino Mountains. And it was there I began to discern a call to ministry, and was mentored by some men and women who in the late 60s, early 70s were very active in the anti-Vietnam War movement.
Oh, wow.
and really helped, and with the farm worker movement, and with other social justice movements that helped me begin to make that connection between social justice and the gospel and ministry.
Mm-hmm.
One of the my younger sister and I had the same experience. We were, as part of a youth retreat, taken to an anti-war demonstration.
That's awesome.
That got tear gassed.
Oh my goodness,
and
that's
so
not awesome.
We have the experience as part of our youth group experience of being tear gassed. Now, that being Southern California, and before cell phones,
wow.
We all gathered together. Everybody was okay. Once our throats cleared and the water quit, once we quit crying and our throats cleared, we went to the retreat center. Everybody had to call their parents because things were on the news to let them know we were okay, and we'd be home the next day as scheduled. The good news about being in Southern California is we could go from that place in a community where this disturbance happened, and then our retreat was at the beach. So we got to play on the beach after that as a reward. Once I kind
the silver lining,
called the ministry. I'm sorry?
I said the silver lining.
Yeah, absolutely, a silver lining. Shared that call with our pastor. He shared it with the church. And I really felt like at that point I'd be disappointing people if I decided to do something else. But there really wasn't anything else I wanted to do. So I went to college, was a religion major, went to seminary. And then my experience of being an African-American woman in ministry meant that it took a long time for me to get a call. And so I had to struggle with what does that mean to be called, to not have that call honored by a church. And so as I moved I did some interim ministry. I worked on our general staff, and we don't talk about a national staff because one of our regions is Canada. So we're the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of the United States and Canada. And so work in our general office, pastored a congregation, worked as an interim pastor, and now was on the regional staff in Ohio and came to Ohio here. And all along that, I learned to ask some questions that kind of furthered my journey.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is, God, what am I supposed to learn from this situation? And that's an important question for me when situations get difficult.
Mm.
The other one is, God, what would you have me do?
Mm.
How am I to be in this particular place at this moment? And those questions have been helpful to me in my discernment about where I need to be and how God is speaking to me. And those still are good questions for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm probably in the last call that I'll have.
Oh, don't say
although
that.
I firmly believe that ministers retire from a place, but not from ministry.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what the next thing is. But I've always said that God has always prepared me for the next thing,
mm-hmm.
even when I don't know what the next thing is. And I think that proves to be true. That has proven over and over to be true. The journey continues.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes from an inspirational speaker is always be open to the next right thing. What happens to be the next right thing.
That's excellent.
It's a powerful thing to remember.
Down. I think that's important.
I wish I could say I came up with it. But it inspires me, especially right now when things are constantly, changing and evolving. It's, what's the next right thing for the church when we can't gather together physically? Right. That's
exactly.
And just exploring that is something that I think we all have to commit to in ministry. And it's not always fun because it would be much easier if things were concrete and there was a little more structure that's consistent in ministry. Right. So we have a high value here of at Greater Purpose, and I think you know this, of preaching with, both the scripture in one hand and definitely a newspaper in the other hand. So in the spirit of cultural relevance, Dr. Bynum, in your opinion, of all the current struggles that America is dealing with, what are the three most important issues that you believe we're facing as a nation today?
The three that I would name are first, a lack of empathy that helps to create the economic and healthcare and housing and all of the disparities that we see, that we just can't put ourselves easily in another person's shoes or hear of another person's experience without some judgment about how they ought to be living. And that kind of inequity, that lack of empathy leads, I think, to a lack of respect. That leads to a lack of seeing just the basic humanity in other people. And the minute we cease seeing others as human beings, we begin to diminish them. And I think as we diminish others, we diminish ourselves. The second thing I think we're dealing with is just white supremacy, this notion that to be white in America is to be right in America and to have all of the rights that one can take. A legacy of white supremacy, there really are two. One is racism and the other is patriarchy that leads to misogyny and leads to, again, just this disrespect for people of color and women that we see in the Black Lives Matter movement, where people are just asking to be treated like human beings.
Yeah.
We see it in patriarchy, where women are just saying, just treat us like human beings. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to get it right all the time, but just understand and see us as people. And I think the third issue that's facing this country is just weak and negligent leadership. One of the people that I watch, one of the pundits I watch, respect a lot, just says this is a terrible time to have terrible leaders.
Word. That'll preach.
And why I like some leaders more than others, to be the kind of leadership we have right now that just has no insight, has no care, no compassion, for the most part, is pretty terrible. So what we need are strong and present and caring leaders.
Agreed.
And so the lack of leadership just makes worse the lack of empathy and feeds the kind of white supremacy that people are working so hard to dismantle.
Amen. That will preach all day, every day. Matter of fact, that has been preaching, right? And that's
right. Exactly.
It's not a situation I am trained to deal with. So I'm still trying to figure this out, and I don't pretend like America hasn't always had problems, but I feel like right now we in ministry are at a crossroads where we have to choose, what we're comfortable saying versus what is ethically right. And it's hard. It's hard to kind of walk that line. And I love what you said there. Whew, it's difficult. That was good stuff. So you and I have discussed this in the past, Dr. Bynum, but transitioning, from what's going on with the nation versus what's going on with the church. Over the last decade, I kind of feel like we have been on the wave of a new reformation, and perhaps what you just discussed is causing this, right? Perhaps our current, our transition into talking about politics and cultural issues is causing this. But as we're on the front wave of something new, and as the church kind of sheds its skin and moves into the future, what do you see the church of the 21st century looking like? What do you see that?
I think, while there'll always be these kind of brick and mortar churches, buildings that people will get back into, I think one of the things we've learned is the truth of a cliche that the church is not the building, the church is its people. And we're learning that right now. People can't be in their buildings or can't be in their buildings in the ways that they have been before. And so the church, I think, will look more like it looks right now, not able to do business as usual, having to reflect really on what is the essential work that we are called to do. And if you believe that, as I do, that essential work of the church is worship, it's building community, it's helping people to grow spiritually, it's doing justice and being involved in acts of compassion and acts of care for people, then the church continues to do that, is doing that. And by church, I mean various congregations are doing that. I had a conversation with members of 5 congregations a few weeks ago, and the question was, how are you engaged in your community? And the answers to that were pretty remarkable, from being involved in justice-based organizations in the community to providing portable showers for unsheltered people so that they can come and just refresh their bodies. And we know that those of us who have access to water in a pretty unlimited basis know how good a good shower can feel. There are others that are participating in community gardens and food banks. So they're doing all of these things that we feel called to do, to say the Church of Jesus Christ is about helping people and about being present to people. I think that we continue to help people, the church will continue to help people know who God is and to be able to articulate who God is for themselves. And being good disciples, we don't say, this is who God is. We say, through your prayer and your discernment and your reflection and the Holy Spirit moving through you, you will know who God is. And we can come together and find where we have some commonality. I've been really impressed by pastors and churches that have been able to adapt to these new ways of worshiping, to, as you alluded to, we're all televangelists now.
It's not fun.
So,
it's not fun.
It's not, but people are learning new things. And the amazing thing is, much like so many of our teachers did last spring, people have had to make these radical changes from in-person worship and meetings and gatherings to doing it all online or virtually, and they've done it. Not without cost, because our pastors are, and you probably are too, are exhausted, just bone weary. Because I know pastors that have not taken vacation. I know several who were scheduled for sabbatical this year who postponed those because they feel like they need to stay with their people. And that comes at a cost, both to their bodies and to their spirits. And yet they are willing to make that sacrifice in order to help the church continue to function.
And it's so
I think,
interesting.
We'll continue to adapt to new ways of being, and that adaptation needed to happen. It needed to happen, and so I think people who might have put off asking the question, what is God calling us to do and be right now, have had to answer that question, and most have answered it well. Others are really struggling and fear that they may not survive as this shelter in place and not being able to worship goes on longer and longer and longer. What we thought might be 2 or 3 months is probably going to be closer to 12 months. And so they're going to have to flip some switches and just figure out how to continue to be church. And part of the role that I have is to help them to do that. So it's an exciting, while it's kind of scary and it's exhausting, I think this is a great time to be the church, because it's a great time if we're willing to answer that question in a different way than we have before. What is God calling us to do and be? The answer isn't to make sure we have more bodies in the pews. The answer is to hear what God is calling us to do. And that for me is my understanding of evangelism, to hear what God's calling us to do and to share that with other people it's also just an exciting time to discover who we are as God's people. Our general minister and president, Terry Owens, has been saying, it's time for us to be the church we say we are.
Mm-hmm.
So that if we're a church of compassion, what are the compassionate things we're doing? If we're an anti-racist church, how are we helping people to both look at their own internalized and externalized racism, and how do we eradicate that? If we are a church that says it's important for us all to support one another, how does that show up in our offerings? How does that show up in the ways we participate in the church? So this is I think, an exciting time, because as I've said several times, it's like everything we have known or everything we have understood has just been thrown up in the air.
And putting it lightly.
And some of it's going to break when it lands, and we're going to catch some of it, and some of it's going to float away.
Mm-hmm.
And, the foundations on which we have built our church and our lives maybe can be repaired, but maybe we need a new foundation. Mm-hmm. And we're in this time of discovering all of that. And I don't know where any of that's going to land, but I think it's really good and fun to just be tested by this time. And to see how we come out on the other side.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because I think, innovation has been necessary, and you and I have talked about that in the church, and I think most people are on board with it to a degree. I think we're hesitant because there's no blueprint for innovation. So we've never been taught these things, and these are, all totally new. We haven't been trained for them. But nothing sparks creativity like necessity. And
that's right.
Now we're in a place where we have to. And for me, it's discouraging in a way, because I know a lot of people are stressed and overworked, but it's also exciting because now we've kind of hit fast forward on evolving, to an extent, and the church is going to look different. In some ways, that's been overdue, even for myself with certain things. And I'm on this new journey, kind of fumbling around, figuring out what the church of the 21st century looks like. So it's scary, It's stressful, it's exciting, it's all of those things in one. It's hard to pinpoint any one emotion when it comes to this, describing this age that we're in. So Dr. Bynum, you talked about what coronavirus has taught us about the church, but what do you think coronavirus, this age that we're in, has taught us about us as a nation? And also, what has it taught you about yourself? Have you learned something about yourself during this age of COVID-19?
I have. I think what I've learned about me is that I'm a pretty high introvert. Mm-hmm. And so just being alone is not difficult for me, even though I live with another person who gets that there are just times when I don't want to talk, and that's fine. But I've found time to read. I've found time and developed a rhythm of working at home, which I hadn't had before. And what I've discovered that's been the most exciting is using all these electronic means we have to communicate with people. We were in the process pre-COVID of setting up a series of Zoom meetings with pastors, and have been able to continue in those Zoom meetings. Have had a couple with any pastor who wanted to join the call. But in September, we'll be setting up some for smaller groups of ministers in geographical areas. And so we'll be on a call with 8 or 10 people to have some conversation. I have discovered that as that part of me that is still a pastor really misses in-person contact.
Me too.
Really misses being able to shake hands and hug and worship in community and just be with people in our congregation. I've said to people, one of my joys is to be at a congregation on a Sunday when there's a meal after church. And I don't always know when those are.
Yes.
But I rarely turn down the opportunity to stay and eat.
Me too.
Both because the food is good and also because that's, breaking bread together is kind kind of at the heart of what we do as a faith community.
Yep.
And so to sit and talk with somebody is always a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Introvert though I am, I do enjoy that.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we've learned about America is two things. One is that we are incredibly individualistic, and to have the sense of autonomy. And we see that in the refusal of people to wear masks, and the refusal of people to socially distance. We have this insistence that I'm going to do what I want to do, and you're not the boss of me, and nobody can tell me what to do, especially the government.
Mm-hmm.
We're also incredibly generous. And so I've seen these stories as recently as yesterday, I think, about people who understand that some people live in food deserts where it's difficult. They can get all the processed food they want, but it's difficult to get fresh produce and cold milk. And so communities have set up refrigerators outside so that anybody who needs produce can just take it.
That's awesome.
And use it and help feed themselves and their families. We see people checking in on their neighbors and asking their neighbors who are unable to go out even to the store, give me your grocery list and I'll go out and shop for you. I think those kinds of things have been pretty incredible. And I really think the heart of America is more generous than the selfishness of America. But the selfishness is pretty harsh.
It is.
And hurtful. So those are the things I see. And let me say another word about the church in this era is, in addition to the incredible resilience and the ability to adapt that I've seen, we have to acknowledge that there are congregations that are frightened and that are struggling.
Yes.
And aren't meeting, don't have people in their churches. They may be mostly elderly that don't have computers or are afraid to, can't quite learn how to log on to Zoom or Facebook to worship.
Yeah.
And those congregations worry if they're going to survive this.
Yeah.
And so part of my job not only is to pray with them, but to continue to encourage them.
Mm-hmm. And, Dr. Bynum, as you're having those conversations, let them know that don't be afraid to get help from younger people in your community. I mean, I'm 35, but I have no idea how to set up Zoom and things like that. Ask my staff. They laugh at my technological incompetence on the reg. I mean, I am not the most gifted with these things, but they are. And getting them involved and sharing their gifts does two things. One, it eliminates that stress of having to learn a new skill set. Actually, it does three things, too. It gets more people involved in your church. And then three, the end result is infinitely better than I could have produced on my own, because they have been doing this for a while and they're, much more adept at these apps and these programs than I am. So let them know, if you can't, ask around. And that's difficult at times because it may take a while to find someone, but when you do, it's worth it. It's definitely worth it.
Absolutely. One of the workshops at one of our annual gatherings several years ago was offered by our regional youth council. And their workshop was, we will show anybody a pretty quick way to download Facebook and Zoom and things on their smartphones. And the workshop was packed. And mainly what they did was to help people connect, set up Facebook. And then people were like, oh, this is great because now I can communicate with my grandchildren.
Yeah.
In a quicker way, how to FaceTime or, whatever the process was on their cell phones. People still talk about that workshop.
Yeah.
And
I was at that workshop.
Say, can we do that again?
Yeah, that was a great workshop.
Which we would.
What was the name of I believe she moved back to Canada now, if I remember correctly. Didn't she put that on? a couple years ago. What was her
I
name?
know who you mean. I can't think of her name either, but I know exactly who you mean.
I think she and I are friends on Facebook. I gotta tag her
Okay.
in this post. I'll remember her name, and my apologies for not remembering your name. But you did such a good job. We were talking about that event now. It was great. And in it, what it reminds me of is years prior to that breakout session in that class, I kind of nudged a congregation to move to projectors and to get rid of the hymn books because nobody was reading the hymn books anyway. And kids were just, coloring all over them. They were getting destroyed, and they could have been put to better use in a congregation that would have utilized them. And some people fought it tooth and nail. And then when we finally got the projectors, they were so excited because they could actually read the words on the wall. The writing was so small, they were struggling reading the lyrics at the time. And I feel like Facebook's been a similar thing. I've seen people that have been hesitant, and I get that hesitancy because I don't enjoy learning these things either. But once they do, they're grateful for it because they can be in touch with family members, as you said, see pictures of loved ones that they haven't seen in years. So I think it's a tool that's a double-edged. There are toxic sides of it, but overall, I think it's beneficial for the church. And what has shocked me, Dr. Bynum, is the amount of real conversations I have had in Facebook Messenger that I don't think I ever would have had one-on-one. I mean, there is this gift with social media of people reaching out that aren't in my proximity. They're not in my location, and they say, "Hey, I need help with this," or "Can you talk about this?" Or "What should I do in this situation?" And as a result of that, we have people that are engaged with our congregation that don't live in the state of California, and that's just been amazing. So, I think there are benefits to this too, as we wrestle and learn. So Dr. Bynum, I had one more question for you here, and my computer's bugging out. Hold on 1 second. Speaking of technology and me learning new things. Okay. Is there anything that you have going on in your personal ministry or any work that you have coming up that you're just really excited about that's coming down the pipeline?
Let me talk real quickly about two things.
Sure.
One is, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing, probably beginning in September, a series of conversations similar to this one, just asking pastors to talk about how they have coped, what gifts they can bring to the church in this post-COVID, in this COVID time. We're not post-COVID yet. What have they learned that's been helpful? What have they learned about how to do worship or how to have meetings or how to hold community together in this time?
That's exciting.
I think that could be a very helpful conversation.
Sure.
The other thing I'm excited about, and this is one of those new things we're all having to learn how to do. We're going to do our annual gathering virtually.
What?
In about a 3-hour session next month.
That's so exciting. I didn't even hear about this because I've been so busy with brewery stuff. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so having no idea how that will work, but having all faith that it will.
Yeah.
We had all of my regional ministry colleagues had a tutorial about it, and that's been very helpful. Our staff's been meeting regularly to talk about it, and so watch for word of it. It's there's some information on the region's website.
I will check that out the moment.
And let me do that political thing: www.ccncn.org. To registration will be free, and we will. We'll be bringing you information. I hope you can't hear my phone ringing.
No, I think they're already calling about it because they're excited. I think they already heard.
There you go.
That it's going on.
So I'll just let that ring for a minute, and so we'll deal with it. So.
Yeah, no. It's more than fine. Again, it's one of those things that happens in this whole age of stay in place. Ideally, you would be with us in a congregation, and we would be having one of those meals like you talked about. But this has been such a treat today, Dr. Bynum. We cannot thank you
I've enjoyed
enough.
it. It's been fun.
I've enjoyed it too. And, to end on a positive note, and you gave me so much encouragement in your message today, what is one thing, though, that is keeping you fulfilled spiritually, that is giving you a sense of hope and comfort in these difficult times of chaos and uncertainty?
There are a couple of hymns that kind of work their way into my spirit. One is Spirit of God, descend upon my heart. Weave it from earth through all its pulses move. Stoop to my weakness, mighty as thou art. And so that's one that I just think about. And the other hymn is by Fannie J. Crosby, old, legendary, has written some of the best and in some ways cheesiest hymns that we've ever sung, but still speak to my spirit. And one of them is Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior. And then ends with kind of, while on others thou art calling, do not pass me by. And so just this plea for the presence of God. And so those hymns and other bits of rhythm and blues songs and gospel and pop songs that just come into my head. And then the other thing is that Micah 6:8 passage.
Okay.
What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God?
It's one of my favorites.
And I try to live that out every day. As I said to somebody else the other day, I fail miserably at that sometimes, particularly when I'm yelling at my television. But
Me
but
too.
but feel called back to that. That's what I hear God requiring of us, and that's how I try to live. Which doesn't mean you don't get angry. But they're both in the Psalm and in Ephesians. There's that verse that says, "Be angry, but do not sin."
Yes.
And the sin for me would be to become so angry that I lose my humanity, and so don't see the humanity in other people, even some of those weak leaders that I talked about before.
Yes. I need to hear that. That's that is a struggle for me. Figuring out, how to have righteous anger without stooping to sin is something that is difficult. Whew, that is a tough path to follow.
It
and
is tough.
That is beneficial to hear that passage today for me. Powerful stuff. Well, Dr. Bynum, I think that's all we have time for today, but we cannot thank you enough, and we look forward to the day when we can have you in person again. I wish that was the case today. But if you would, I'm going to close us out in a benediction, and if you could pray with us too, Dr. Bynum, I appreciate it. Y'all, may the revolution... Yeah, absolutely. Y'all, may the revolution of Jesus go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you in healing this wasteland and protect you through the storm. May it give you peace through this world as you demand the justice it has for you and others. And may it bring you home preparing to continue love's mission beyond your doors. Love and justice to all of you, and much love to you, Dr. Bynum. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. God be with you and with your listeners. And I look forward to the time when we can be together face to face.
Me too. Can't wait. As you said, I figured out how much of an introvert I'm not, and I'm a pretty big introvert, but I could use some socializing. I think it's after 2 months I need a little bit of socializing.
Exactly.
It's getting a little difficult. Well, much love, Dr. Bynum, and I will check out the regional website so we can participate in the annual gathering as well.
Okay, terrific.
God bless.
God bless you. Thank you.
On the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body broken for you. Take and eat. And as often as you do so in remembrance of me." And likewise, he took out the wine and he poured it for his disciples. And he said, "This is my blood poured out for you. Take and drink, and as often as you do so in remembrance of me." As you take of this bread and you take from this cup, know that you are love, and you are meant to sow love in this broken world. Grace and peace to you. And now, May the revolution of Jesus go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you in healing this wasteland and protect you through the storm. May it lead you through this world seeking the justice it demands for you and for others. And may it bring you home preparing to continue love's mission beyond your doors. Grace and justice to you.